and welcome to our July TxSUS session. My name is Andrea Rochat. I am the Director of Healthcare Communications and Outreach at the Be Well Institute on Substance Use and Related Disorders here at UT Health San Antonio. I am very honored to be facilitating our conversation today. And I'm really glad you all are here and those who are just coming in as well for this very important session today titled Influence in Action, Navigating the Fast Pace of Policy and Funding Shifts. A little bit about this series before we get started. These sessions are live webinars held between our annual Texas Substance Use Symposium, or TxSUS, with expert speakers to continue the conversation on issues at the intersection of policy and practice. The goal of these sessions is to promote awareness, drive engagement, and support for innovative projects addressing substance use across Texas. A few housekeeping notes before we go on. Video and audio is disabled for all attendees as this is part of the webinar format, but this session is also being recorded and will be available on our TxSUS YouTube page afterwards. Lastly, I ask that you use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions. This is a little different than Zoom meetings where everything happens in the chat. So use that Q&A box to submit questions for our panelists today. And please feel free to share comments or engage with others in the typical chat box, which I'm seeing lots of folks doing already. And RIT is also sharing some links there as well. Let's go on to the next slide. So the views and opinions expressed by participants and speakers throughout the sessions are solely their own and don't reflect the official position or the policy of UT Health San Antonio. And next, our learning objectives and probably why we got such wonderful numbers of registrants today. What we'll learn in today's session, how to evaluate and navigate the current policy and funding environment. We'll compare and contrast strategies for shaping public policy and construct effective alliances and coalitions and learn how to successfully adapt to the current policy environment. And next slide. As always, you can receive one free CEU credit after attending today. You'll have to complete the post-session survey. We're going to drop the link for that a little bit later in the chat, and we will also email it to you after today's session. Actually, we have a very proactive IT. I think we've already dropped that link. That's great. Okay, I think we can stop the screen share. Great. So a little bit different than usual. Before today's session, we have a brief poll to take a temperature read on the audience, and to help our speaker get to know you all and help you all get to see who else is in this session with you. So that has been launched. We got 4 questions. I'll read through them, but they should have just popped up on your window, and you should be able to choose, select from a drop-down menu of answers. So that first one, has your organization been affected by changes in federal funding or policy in the past year? And if you click on the drop-down menu, you should be able to choose from just one from a range of options. Second, does your organization have a plan to diversify funding sources such as grants, donations, contracts, etc.? And third, curious if if you currently collaborate with trade associations or professional organizations in your field. And we offer again a range of options on that one. And then finally, have you developed a relationship with your elected officials, whether that be local, state, or federal? And we'll take another 30 seconds to give folks time to take a breath and respond. Usually I have a cheat sheet that tells me what percentage of respondents have answered, and I go probably up to like, I aim for 70%. So I think we're inching towards there. We'll take another 15 seconds. I see a few folks have just popped in. Welcome to our TxSUS session. We're just starting with a brief poll to get to learn a little bit more about the audience that's joined us today. All right, I think we've got a pretty good response rate. Thank you all for being so engaged and active. Our IT can share those results so that we can all see who we're in this meeting with. So has your organization been affected? And John, give a nod if you can also see these. I wanted to make sure you got a
Yeah,
sense of who's here. Great. So has your organization been affected by changes? I'm seeing a lot of a lot of yes. Um, and on planning, does your organization have a plan to diversify funding sources? Looks like there's a lot of interest in it, but it's still kind of something in development for most. As we look to collaborations with trade associations or other organizations, we've got a pretty good mix here. Pretty good mix, but at least some active involvement. And then on our final one, another pretty good mix, having about whether organizations have developed a relationship. We've heard from many in the past year, past 6 months, that this very tumultuous time has also been quite an isolating one. And if anything, I think the poll results here are a helpful reminder that none of us are in this alone. So I just want to thank you all for sharing that honest feedback with us as we jump into our session. IT, you can go on and close that poll out. And I think if you've got that poll window still up in front of your screen, you should be able to just select close and get it minimized. Well, thank you for that. I am very excited to introduce our speaker today. Jon Comola is the founder and chief executive officer of Y River Group. Jon founded the group in 1997 to champion new solutions and form the basis of support for a new vision of America's healthcare system focused on market-based solutions and public-private partnerships. Jon brings over 25 years of experience in health insurance and public affairs with a strong track record in shaping policy at the state and federal levels. As Vice President of Government Affairs for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Texas, Jon led the development and execution of public strategies and served as a trusted advisor to elected officials and corporate leaders. He's also worked with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's National Chamber Foundation to launch major healthcare initiatives, including the National Healthcare Solutions Summits, regional forums that are designed to unite stakeholders and spotlight community-based solutions to improve access, affordability, and quality in healthcare. Um, so we're also going to drop a reference that Jon shared with our team during the planning of this session, and he wanted to share with you all. He'll touch on this topic, this reference a little bit later in the session, but we kind of wanted everybody to have it ahead of time as we go into our conversation. So that's a little bio about Jon, but that's really everything you can find on Google, and it certainly doesn't tell the full story. So Jon, let's start. Can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself?
thank you so much, Andrea, and welcome everyone. I'm delighted to have a chance to speak with you on this topic. You know, I was looking at the title and I thought we should probably have titled it How to Weather the Storm. It's a difficult time, I think, for most of us in the health and healthcare space. So, what I'll try to do today is to give you some tools, both in terms of the way you think about these issues, but also give you some learnings from my experience. You mentioned 25 years. I counted it this morning thinking, what did I want to disclose? That it's been 40 years since I've been doing this. So I think I need to update my website resume. But in any event, again, I welcome everyone. I wanted to give you a little more context in terms of my background. I was a graduate of the University of Texas in the early 80s, and I went to work in the state capitol. Um, During that time, I started out in the Sergeant at Arms office, which is a fancy name for an errand boy. And I ran around all the different offices delivering documents. But over that a 10-year span, I ended up being the chief of staff to the chairman of the Jurisprudence Committee in the Texas Senate. I got him elected to Congress. He wanted me to go up and be his chief of staff there. I had a young family, decided that wasn't something I wanted to do. And as soon as I announced that, I had three or four organizations approach me asking if I would come to work for them. One of those was Blue Cross Blue Shield. And I liked that offer because it's a not-for-profit organization. It's focused on its members. Um, and that was appealing to me. So I was approached by both the chairman of the board, Ray Farabee, Senator Farabee, and the president, Dr. Rogers Coleman, to take over a position that oversaw all of the legislative and regulatory activity at the federal level and the state level. So I did that for about 10 years. And then I created my own not-for-profit, Y River Group on Healthcare, which is WRGH.org. And that was created in a vision of a catalytic entity that could bring senior executives together from the public policy space and the private sector to divine or create or work through solutions to many of the challenges we face in health and healthcare in this country, uniquely, as a matter of fact, face compared to other major nations. And we've been doing that for now 25 years, both at the national level, at the state level, and across the globe. So I share all that by way of saying I've been at this a while, and I think part of what I want to share with you today is some of those learnings from that 40-year span of experience. Andrea?
Thank you, John. Besides getting the numbers wrong, there's quite a bit more that we can learn from just a conversation instead of Google. 40 years, that's pretty terrific. Well, before we dive into our discussion today, I want to give all of our attendees just a quick overview of how our session is going to flow. It'll be a little different than a typical TxSUS session. We've organized this conversation into three sections, and each are focused on a key topic. So, first, we'll start with an overview of the current environment, what's happening now, and what it means for all of us. And then we'll move into a discussion about how to effectively communicate with policymakers. And finally, we'll wrap up with a look at what it might take to restore or maintain sustainable funding in our field. So each section will include a brief presentation from John to set the stage, followed by some time for your questions and comments. So please feel free to jot down your thoughts or drop questions in the Q&A as we go along. We want this to be as interactive and as useful for you all as possible. So let's get started. John, can you share with us kind of an overview of the current environment?
I can and will. We're living unique times. When I began my work, there was very different environment. There were lots of collegial conversations around policy at the state and the federal level. Today, we find ourselves in a rather polarizing environment where both the Republicans and the Democrats tend to be at one end of the spectrum or the other end of the spectrum. Very little goes on in the center. And as a result, I think we have sort of a tribal mentality in our politics. And it spills over into policy because instead of talking about policy, we talk about politics. And members tend to vote wanting to score points for their team, so to speak, and position themselves politically. That has a very dramatic effect on health and healthcare in this country, particularly because leadership in America, when it changes at the executive branch, can emphasize one area or another in health and healthcare and can support or not support different programs. We find ourselves in a very, very unique place today. And I think it's apt that what we're going to do today is really trying to give you some background, but also some context of how to weather the storm. Uh, One of the things to know going in is who you're working with in terms of public policy makers. For the most part, certainly here in Texas and certainly in DC, you have majorities on the Republican side, and most of those majorities are very, very conservative. So that creates a tension. I describe it as sort of rugged individualism versus social good when it comes to public policy. So in this space, the conservatives place a real emphasis on that rugged individualism or that pull myself up by the bootstraps kind of mentality versus what liberals typically do, or Democrats on the far end of the spectrum, which is saying we should all boats should rise with the tide. We have a social and moral imperative to support all our citizens, and so that is a fundamental pillar to the way decisions are being made in today's policy environment. The other thing that you face in this environment, and this is on us, frankly, most lawmakers, certainly conservative lawmakers, see the funding of social services as a cost item. They don't see it as something that actually benefits and provides support for the economy, whether it's the local economy or regional economy or the state economy. So as a result, what we have to do, and one of the things I'll talk about today, is the importance of shifting that conversation so that lawmakers understand that when they put money into programs like Medicaid or any of the other array of services, that there's actually a financial benefit to the state for doing that. And that's part of what the document that Andrea alluded to earlier in the link that was sent to you, that research points out a really great pathway of how to make that point to lawmakers. So I encourage you to look at that. Maybe you can glean part of it while we talk today so we can talk a little more in depth about it. So we think in terms of lawmakers think in terms of mental health services, substance use services, lack of care, access, social determinants of health, and they're not top of mind for most lawmakers in this conservative environment. So because our work fits within the mindset of a greater social good, most of you do what you do because you're passionate about your work and you want to improve the health of society. Your or our trajectory in that space is long term. The current conservative environment is short term. So this dichotomy or these stressors, or however you want to see that vision, is very important because it tells us how we should act and interact with lawmakers in order to be effective. So on the face of it, I don't want to end on a down note. So on the face of it, it looks like your policy goals are at odds with the current political environment, but that's not necessarily true. Andrew, what else would you like for me to talk about?
Well, let's open it up to the group and see if there are any questions just around the current environment for John. I certainly have a couple, but I want to save them in case others do as well. You can use the chat or you can use the Q&A. Well, John, just maybe one before we get going, and if this is something you're about to talk on, just say, "Hey, wait a second." But I'm thinking about what you just said. In a political environment that maybe is prioritizing short-term wins, how do you communicate long-term value? Have you seen successful examples of that, or do you have some kind of guidance on that for us?
Yeah, I think in a nutshell, you get success in that environment by speaking their language. And that's a lot of what we'll talk about in the next segment, how to speak their language. So you want to meet a lawmaker where they are. You don't want to try to have them meet you where you are. And you want to talk about what you do, not in terms of benefiting you and your organization, but how it benefits their constituents.
Yeah. And as I knew would happen, we've got an engaged audience. I got a couple more questions for you. Is there a way to make policymakers see our work as more than just a line item? And I think that's in reference to the sort of economic priority you might have mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. There is a way to do that. And it's in the language we use, frankly. One of the things that you'll hear me talk about throughout this session is the importance of using the right language and setting a tone where you're not at odds with that lawmaker, that their conservative view and their interest in the economy of the state of Texas and their interest in cutting spending and things like that, that you're aligned with that. But to do so with open eyes, to know that the folks that you're serving actually add value to the state, financial value to the state. And framing how we talk about lawmakers in those terms makes a huge difference in this environment.
Great, thank you. And I know you'll be sharing some more guidance on that specific kind of that language as we move forward. A question here in the chat, what happened to the medical lobby? How could management allow us to get such deep cuts to public insurance?
So I'll say the first part of that again.
Yeah, what happened to the medical lobby?
Yeah. Well, I think what's happening in this environment is decisions are not being made through the normal traditional lens of influence. There's an overriding influencer on the stage right now. And we have members whose districts are often very, very tight, which, for win or lose. And so when you're able to go in at the primary level, which is an electoral issue that it is should be set for another conversation. But the primaries in all the states are so narrowly defined. And what our current executive branch has been able to do is to really influence the outcome of those primaries. So because of that, legislators are afraid if someone like an Elon Musk were to come in and throw a bunch of money against someone who's running against them, then they won't be able to compete. And so as a result, that influences how they behave. So the normal things that you would see take place in the environment that lobbyists might drive is not given the same weight. You might be muted, Andrea.
Thank you. Thank you for doing my job for me. I appreciate it. Um, we have a couple questions here, and if you're wondering if where they are, I'm going to wait till our next section because I do think you're going to touch on some of these topics. But there is one sort of reflective question I'd like to put to you now. Have you seen pendulum effects, or are there pendulum effects you've seen over your career that swing both towards and away from public health funding?
Absolutely. And one of the glimmers of hope in all of this is my experience is when politics or policy is made, when politics drive policy and the policy is at the extreme, one end, the pendulum swings back toward the center over time. So it's unsustainable to stake out a policy position that's extremely to the right or extremely to the left in this country historically that doesn't over time swing back toward the center. That's a glimmer of hope.
Yeah, I like some cause for optimism as we move forward. Um, well, a reminder, you can keep those questions coming. I do ask if you try to put them in the Q&A box. That will help with us filtering them and mentioning them during this session. But let's keep moving forward. John, what strategies should we use in communicating with policymakers?
Yeah, this is a really key point, and it's something that I don't know whether this audience is sophisticated with that, but I want to say that when you're in an environment of advocacy, you want your writings to fit that environment. So whether it's policy papers or op-eds or articles or online communications, scrub your language in a way that fits the current conservative environment. Don't use phrases that are off-putting. I've even heard people go so far as to say don't use the words public health anymore. Use community health. So it's being sensitive to where we are so that we don't immediately alienate a lawmaker just by the way in which we phrase our policy positions. Um, so the current majority is see social services as a cost item, as I said before, and how important it is that we change that. We want them to see health spending on social services as an asset, not as a liability. And that's something we should own as an industry because there's a lot that we do that doesn't necessarily highlight that. And that needs to be front and center particularly in an environment that we're in now, but for that matter, anytime that should be how they should see these investments in our citizenry as something that's an investment in the overall good of the state. Uh, the article that I sent you that is in your chat was developed by the Texas Alliance on Health. The Texas Alliance on Health was something I created about 12 years ago, and it's a membership organization. It's got about 60 members. It's very, very diverse. It's everything from every Texan to Children's Defense Fund to Episcopal Health, Methodist Health, Texas Hospital Association, Medical Association, Chamber of Commerce, the Texas Association of Business, so on and so forth. So it's a very diverse group. And they were brought together 12 years ago to try to get Texas to expand Medicaid. Obviously, we haven't been successful at that, but nonetheless, that's what they rallied around at the time. And we continue to hold 3 or 4 meetings a year. And I think just the ability to come into a space where you're meeting with people whose views may be different from your own gives you a better insight how to be effective in the policymaking space and how to build alliances and coalitions. Um, the article that we sent was titled "The Impact of Uninsured on the Texas Economy." So most people, when they talk about the uninsured, and this is just take this as sort of at a broad conceptual level. Most people, and I'll use uninsured as a straw man for that conversation. Most people who argue for expanding Medicaid in Texas argue on the basis of look at how much money will come to Texas as a result of that expansion. Look at how many more people will have access to Medicaid as a result of that expansion. Um, and that has not been an effective argument. So what the Texas Alliance on Health and its membership decided to do was to try to turn that question in the other direction. And so we hired a firm, Applied Policy out of DC, and we recruited Mark McClellan. Many of you may know and remember Mark from his days at the Council of Economic Advisors, as the commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, as the director of CMS. He's now at Duke at the Margulis Foundation, and Mark and I have stayed in touch over the years. So I recruited him to be the face of this report, because he's seen as a bipartisan subject matter expert and is very well respected on both sides of the aisle and has done a good job of maintaining that balance over the long term. So what we did is we commissioned a report, and the idea was to shift the conversation of the uninsured from social implications to economic implications. Um, Up to that point, most of us didn't look at it that way. We wanted the report to be an alarm, to be eye-opening to the folks who read it. So we really leaned into showing the adverse economic implications of maintaining the status quo. So we wanted to change the conversation and illustrate that in a way that would cause the state lawmakers to look at it differently. And the research was widely appreciated and valued. It was written up in most of the major dailies and received a great deal of attention. Um, but you know, it's a concept that drills down into some numbers that actually become very eye-opening. I'll read an excerpt from the article itself. The upshot of the research estimated that if Texas does not address the issue of uninsurance in a proactive way, it is estimated that by 2040, over 6.1 million Texans will be uninsured, and by then, Texas could see the loss of $178.5 billion due to both lost earnings and the value of poor health attributable to the lack of insurance. So what we did is I had Applied Policy and Mark look at this from an impact of things like presenteeism, absenteeism, productivity. And those, when you look at the loss because of poor health, because of the lack of access to coverage or to services, then you're able to put together a number. And the more you push that date out, 2040 to 2050 to 2060, the larger that number gets. And that kind of mindset becomes a very influential framework in which to grab the attention of lawmakers. So I encourage you to look at your communications through this kind of a lens. I think you'll find it rewarding in terms of getting the attention of different lawmakers. Um, there's never been a greater need for effective strategic communication. There are landmines, and you need to be mindful of those, the way in which you say something, and be sure to do it in a framework, as we've said already, that resonates with your audience, speak their language. Um, but in this particular environment, I would encourage each of you, if you're not already doing this, be visible, be present, show up. I have a friend of mine who used to use a phrase that three-fourths of everything in life is defined by just showing up, just being in the room, being able to just to be present in what you're doing. So write letters, submit op-eds, meet with your delegation, your local delegation, but don't meet with them on your behalf. Meet with them on behalf of those you serve, because it's not your story, it's their story that you want to tell. Um, Stress the economic benefit to the state through improving citizens' health and productivity. Think about framing the adverse economic impact by talking about these things. Again, presenteeism, absenteeism, loss of productivity. Reframe the approach you're taking to be persuasive to conservatives. The other thing I'll mention is the power of third-party advocacy. This is a concept where someone else carries your message, someone whose interest or is aligned with yours, but it's someone who's not in the business you're in. So the place I found that most resonated with that was the business community. As was mentioned earlier, I spent a good deal of time at Blue Cross and Blue Shield. And when I went into Blue Cross, working for Blue Cross Blue Shield, it was the mid 90s and managed care had just come into being. It was in a fad at that time, but it was not well received by providers and or the hospital community or doctors. And so as a result, it got a lot of pushback. And so the first session I worked for Blue Cross, I would go in and try to describe the benefits of managed care, and I just got beaten down. So I realized I can't be the voice on this issue. No legislator is going to go back to their district and say, "Hey, I voted with Blue Cross, with a health insurance company. Look at me, vote for me." So that doesn't happen. So as a result, I said, "Well, who out there has a vested interest in containing the cost of healthcare?" And I said, the employers do, the payers. That's who has the vested interest in doing that. So I developed a strategy, ran it by my board. They liked it. And so I went about executing it. The first thing I did was got myself placed on the board of directors of the Texas Association of Business Chambers of Commerce. So once I was on the board, I began to season thoughts among the board members of creating a health partners task force, which was a combination of health insurance and other kinds of insurance companies meeting with the members of the Texas Association of Business and the chamber, and creating pathways, legislative pathways that actually aligned with what I was charged to do at Blue Cross, which was to foster the growth of managed care. So now instead of me going into the Capitol and telling my story about why managed care was important, or not, I know a lot of you may hate managed care, and that's fine. Just take this story on the face of how to create a third party advocacy environment. So what happened in that space was they began to issue policy papers. They began to go into the Capitol and talk about the benefits. So I no longer had to tell my own story. The employer community, who the legislature resonated with and always has supported, were completely delighted to hear the story coming from them, where they wouldn't didn't want to have it come from me whatsoever. So that Health Partners Task Force became a template for other states, and so it spread across the U.S. and even up to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Eventually, and then Andrew, you mentioned what I did with the Chamber of Commerce across the nation. But in addition to that, the chamber was so elated that I was bringing in all these new ideas that they appointed me the chair of the first health committee. They created a health committee, appointed me chair of the committee, and the National Association of Manufacturers saw that and said, "Well, we need to get Jon Comola in our tent." So they invited me to serve on the advisory board. But it was all because I created an environment that helped them meet something they wanted, which was to arrest the rising cost of healthcare. But it helped me in my industry because I was trying to foster that same concept, but through the tools that we had in the insurance industry itself. So again, what can you do? Be present, be creative, be active, get actively involved in advocacy groups, trade associations, professional societies, and talk to and recruit partners. Build unusual bedfellow coalitions, things that people don't normally see come together, like the Texas Alliance on Health. You don't see those players at the same table very often. But you'll learn all kinds of things by moving around like that and opening your eyes to new possibilities as you listen and participate in new conversations. Get out from behind your desk. That may sound really simple, I'm sure it does, but it's a very important concept to be successful in the kind of environment that we're in. So one other thing I'll say is that by taking a collective approach toward influencing policymakers, building coalitions and things like that, you are meeting another need of a lawmaker. Lawmakers typically run and follow the course of least resistance. So if you can create a course of least resistance, which is to say that when you go into their offices and ask them for something, you've got 60 organizations standing behind you in the same space advocating for the same thing. Because the first thing they'll ask you is, who's going to oppose it? So you want to be ready and create that course of least resistance for those folks that you want to try to influence inside the Capitol. I'll close with keep in mind political winds always shift, never burn a bridge, no matter how passionate you are about an issue. This too shall pass.
That's a helpful reminder, John. Thank you. I gotta say, third party advocacy feels an awful lot like my strategy for getting my son to do his homework. Like, I find a trusted partner that he will listen to besides myself. Well, we've got a lot of questions coming up here in the chat, and I'm going to try to combine a couple just to streamline our answers. But I think we all have a sense of certain buzzwords, certain terms that you just can't say anymore, or it shuts the conversation down. So we've had a couple questions here around asking if you could share about words that are quote unquote bad words like equity or social determinants of health or Medicaid expansion. What one are there other terms you've heard that we need to be used replacing or updating or anything like that? And how do you approach those kinds of conversations when the lexicon itself seems to be cause for sometimes shutting down the conversation?
Well, it's an evolving space, right? It's not just one thing, but you certainly know the ones that you just mentioned, Andrea, DEI, things that talk about the social good. Even as I said, public health is not something you're supposed to say these days. So I can't give you a list of those things, but just think in terms of if your worldview as a conservative is reducing cost, and you see the health and healthcare space as a drain on your ability to reduce that cost and doesn't add value, doesn't actually put money into the coffers, which it does, then you're not going to resonate with anything that leans into social service constructs of language. So, whatever those seem to mean to you, talk with your colleagues about it. Think about that. I'm sure your trade associations and other organizations have been active at trying to reframe the way they approach a conservative legislature, whether it's in Congress or whether it's a state legislature. So look to them to help you answer that question. What language works best?
Appreciate that. And I think there's also a lot of knowledge among our audience today. So please do use that chat. It's visible to everybody. If there are terms you've learned or updated guides you found or particular strategies that have been effective for your organization, share those and we'll learn from each other here. John, another question for you. How can we advocate for policies without talking about politics in such a divided environment?
How can we advocate for policies without talking about politics? Um, hmm. Well, I think that the world of advocacy, as I mentioned earlier, is one that leans into building a strong basis for support for what you're advocating. So, just as an example I gave about the employer community, if you want to advocate and you don't see yourself being able to do it through your organization because your organization is a non-starter. For example, let's take Every Texan. I love Every Texan. I've worked with them for years. But if I did this report that I did about the uninsured and I'm issued it through Every Texan, any conservative lawmaker is going to look at that and say, that's coming from Every Texan. I'm not going to pay attention to that. Now, if it came from TPFF or one of the conservative groups out there, then yeah, they would look at it immediately. So try to expand your base of who supports and who is aligned with what you're doing and carry them into that room when you talk to that lawmaker. They'll see what you are asking them through a different lens because they see someone else by your side that is aligned with their worldview. Does it make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that response. I want to get one more question in before we go to our final section. What do you recommend for people who work in nonprofits or agencies that are barred from lobbying or advocacy, or just groups that where advocacy makes them a bit nervous? How do those organizations walk that line safely?
Well, look at who your partners are. Look around you and say, who are the other folks that care about the things I care about? Are they able to advocate? And if they are, get your issues embedded in their agenda. That's exactly what I did with the Health Partners Task Force. I couldn't carry my own water, so I had to find someone who could carry that water. It wasn't because I wasn't allowed to advocate. I ran a $1.2 million PAC, but it was because I was persona non grata as an insurance representative. So look around you and look at who else cares about what you care about, and then go meet with them and say, I'd like to ask you to and put this issue into your mix when you go talk to lawmakers. Befriend them. If you're not friends with them, if you don't know who those folks are, you should get to know them. You should find out who those people are. But reassess who you're hanging with. And if you're only within the church and you're not going outside the walls of the church, you should probably think about stepping out and saying, who else is out there that believes in religion, to use a metaphor.
I like that. Terrific. Well, lots of questions still coming up, but I do want to make sure we get to the last section of our discussion, then we'll try to return to some of those throughout. So for our last portion, we're going to turn to a topic I know many organizations are challenged by right now, including Be Well. And that's around funding. John, what can organizations do to restore sustainable funding?
Well, you're going to hear a few reoccurring themes. A lot of it has to do with broadening your tent. But first of all, begin looking past the fire at your feet. So don't do the woe is me thing. Instead, say, okay, so I need to rethink my approach. Um, You're first of all, you're not the only organization suffering. So you've got a lot of other organizations out there that are experiencing the same thing you are. So there might be learnings there. You might talk to them about how they're handling it. What are they doing? This is a time where it's an open door for organizations that maybe haven't worked together in the past, but for whatever reasons, competitive reasons or other things, they might see value in partnering with you today in a way that they didn't or wouldn't before because things were great, right? Now they're not so great. So stay in touch with your allies, look at what they're doing, listen to what they're doing and how they're managing this environment and see if there are anything that you can learn. Um, Secondly, look within your own organization. So ask your leadership, what is it that we do that someone else out there might pay us to do? Are there skills within what we do that could be remarketed to a payer? So instead of leaning into the traditional lines of funding that you've had in the past, what I'm suggesting is diversify your funding streams. They may not be some of the things you may come up with as ideas, and we did this within Be Well as well, may be long term or may have a cost involved in them. So find the ones that you can do near term. Execute on the ones that you can do with the staff you have, just by reaching out to other groups who may not be aware that you can provide services to them, and maybe you can provide it at a dollar price point that's cheaper than what they're paying for it now. So that's what we're doing within Be Well as we speak. But if you do that concertedly, if you actually put in with intent, a structure inside your organization that methodically goes through asking the key thought leaders in your organizations those questions. What could we do? What are we currently doing? So we're not creating something new, but what are we currently doing that other people would be willing to pay for? And have them respond to that and then pluck through it in terms of the triaging what will work now, work within existing budgets, work within a short time frame so that you begin to diversify that base of funding. Think about your partnerships,
Mhm.
alliances, coalitions that might be able to help you explore, find solutions. In other words, look at what you do as a partner to another organization. Um, uh, you could build something new if it wasn't too costly, or you could do a shoulder initiative that might benefit your organization and its work, something that's adjacent to what you do that you could do with someone else. Remember, the need for your services has not gone away. So the pain points still exist, whether you're being funded to do it now or not. There's someone out there that believes that that's something that they want to have happen. And I'll close with this thought. I Googled the question of foundations in Texas that focus on health. And then here's what it said. There are currently 4,801 foundations in Texas. I didn't know that. $399 billion in total assets that specifically give grants to healthcare. Additionally, there are 3,016 foundations in Texas with $401 billion in total assets that give grants to voluntary health associations and medical disciplines. That's a lot of opportunity. So think about doing these things not as discrete one-off items, but do them in tandem with one another. The various streams that I just mentioned. Try these things all at the same time. One of the things that happened in Be Well that I thought was remarkable is that when we empowered the directors in that organization to think about what they currently do and how it could be marketed to others or add value to someone else, they felt empowered in an environment where we felt pretty um, oppressed. So it was an uplifting exercise just to think that through. Andrea?
That's yeah, thank you for pointing to that example, John. We've got a lot of questions here in the chat, so I'm glad we got some time to go through them. Let me love you someone too. So considering that Texas HHSC will be going into sunset review, what can we do to prepare for that process and how can we be visible and contribute to the conversation? And I also did my own Googling because I wasn't familiar with the phrase, but for those on the call, it sounds sunset reviews aim to streamline government, improve efficiency, ensure accountability. That's the purpose of them, but their process to ensure things are necessary, effective, and efficient. And I think that's maybe the positive spin on it. So, John, what are your thoughts for preparing and being visible in that time?
Well, a couple of things. One, it was Representative Benny Bach out of New Braunfels that created the Sunset Commission. And he did so because he wanted state agencies to reaffirm their value to the state. So it's not intended to be a harmful exercise. It may be used differently today. I haven't been close to it in a while, but it was intended to be an exercise that actually had agencies justify why they exist. And that's a good thing, right? So what I would do, since you're talking about an agency, I would go talk to my contacts inside that agency and ask them how can you be supportive of their needs in that environment? So that it's not you coming up with ideas that you think they want, but rather these are the things that they told you over a cup of coffee outside their office, and that they've shared with you would be something that you could help with. There's nothing inappropriate for them to share that with you. There's no reason they wouldn't share that with you. And I imagine it would further deepen your relationship with them that you walked up and said, "I'd like to help you."
That's great guidance. Are you, speaking of those interactions with policymakers, how do you see policymakers responding or not responding to community pushback on a lot of the that have been happening? What are you seeing as the response to that?
Um, Very cautionary response for the reasons I said at the opening of this call. Elected officials are very nervous, and um, I won't share any personal insights from conversations with them, but a lot of elected officials would like to see a new tomorrow, to tell you the truth. So that's why I think one of the things that you want to come away with from this briefing this afternoon, is that perseverance matters a lot. And this will pass. The mindset you should be in is how can I weather this storm and get to the other side? Because it will change and it will be different in the future. And so doing things that might harm you or breach a relationship is not the right way to handle it. In other words, trying to pressure someone to do something they're uncomfortable doing, but rather try to lean into the idea of taking this as an opportunity to talk to them about what they see on the other side as we come out. So that you begin to understand the kind of things that really stress them that's happening at the community level, and that you share that same same sensibilities.
I can appreciate that. So finding those shared priorities, those shared goals, even when it feels we're moving further and further apart, right? You had referenced the article you sent ahead and the one we shared in the chat, referencing around Medicaid expansion. And there's a question here that sort of, fast forward to 2025. How do you suggest groups advocate for Medicaid now, even with all the arguments that have been made about long-term costs and economic disruption that might result?
Well, I think there are a couple of things we can do. One, we can look at states who were in a similar mindset and have now done it and have been successful and whatever, wherever those success stories are. I would caution you that if you're going to use other state examples, use states that are like ours, they're the same political color as ours, so that you're not offering up an example of California to a Texan, because that won't resonate. But if you can look at those states, those other 40 states that have expanded Medicaid, what their experience has been, and paint a positive picture, I think would make it a big difference.
As much
Just
as I like to gripe about that, when my in-laws from California visit, I have the same guidance where it's like, know your audience, guys. Know your audience. Um, well, let's see. How might John one get the point across that once medical providers like regional hospitals shutter their doors, you can't just reverse that? And if I can pick that question apart a bit, I think it's sort of like conveying a sense of urgency and also a sense of you can't turn this on and off like a water hose. So message strategies for messaging that.
I think there's some strategies like that that are just they are what they are, right? There's not they're undeniable that when you pull funding from a rural clinic or a rural hospital in a way that's just completely disruptive, that you can't rebuild that. I don't think that's a conversation that would be inappropriate for an op-ed or for a policy paper or for any audience, conservative or Republican. I mean, Republican, conservative, or Democrat, liberal. So I think just saying it, saying the bold, the plain facts of the matter in in a plain spoken way, not embellishing it with how many people you're hurting or those kinds of things, but just saying when you do this, it's irreversible. It will take this long to build this back up, and will cost more to rebuild than it does running it today.
I think I hear you hitting on some of those themes you've reiterated too, is addressing the issue from their perspective and their priorities.
Yeah.
Time for a couple more because they're really good. I know we're running a little bit into our time, but I do want to make sure we answer these. Given the federal cuts, is it realistic to think about state or local funds as enough support for organizations?
I'm not an expert in that, the trade-off, but I can tell you that even within some of the organizations I worked with, they have found a receptive ear last session to channeling money into these organizations, some of these organizations who were hit hard with the recent changes. So I think there's a receptivity. Again, I can't stress enough to you guys how important it is to build relationships with your local delegation. If you don't know your lawmakers in your backyard and they don't know you, if you walk down the street and they don't recognize you and don't say hello, you've failed. Because the most important thing about politics, outside of the electoral side of looking at it, is that it is a relationship business. It is literally about who knows who and whether they have built a bond and have a common understanding of one another.
Very well said. And I want to draw the participants' attention over to the chat. Thank you, Sean, for also adding some content to answer the question around sunset reviews. I think there's much to learn from what he just shared there. John, I think we're nearing the end, and I want to make sure we have some time to kind of wrap up our conversation. Um, I'm gonna frame this last question to you with the question that came through in our Q&A, which is to say these feel like unprecedented times and what efforts can be taken now that feel effective. And with that question in mind, I want you to sort of share with us what key takeaways are. What are the big ideas you hope today's attendees are going to walk away with, whether they're thinking about how to navigate the current policy environment or engage effectively with decision makers or work towards more sustainable funding?
Well, I think in terms of the current environment, at least in my mind, I have to stake out that this will pass. So perseverance becomes a key word in my mind, and reach deep into your reservoir, your self reservoir, to find the ability to stand up every day and not fight for your cause, but communicate your cause effectively in a way that resonates. But do that every day, and I think the last man standing is the one that wins. And so in this environment, perseverance uh, is key. And then when I think about funding, I think about phrases like be creative, get out of your comfort zone, and think about ways of funding your organization that will uh, that will help the people inside your organization see the value that you deliver, and that will be joyous in seeing that other people see that value and are willing to pay for it.
That's beautifully said. Thank you so much for that. I'll keep it open if we have any last questions. For a couple of these questions, as we were able to, we were typing a couple of responses just because we weren't able to get to them in real time. And so if you have one in the Q&A, make sure to check back in that box if we've typed out an answer for you. Well, John, I really want to thank you for your time. We do have one last slide here to share with the group. And I'll ask our IT to bring that up. But while they're bringing up our last slide, John, I just want to thank you so much for your time and your discussion today. It's hopefully gives a sense of a little bit of a sense of calm and a little bit of a forward-sensing look of hope in what has felt like I said before, very isolating and tumultuous and desperate time. And I certainly take that moving forward. So as you all know, as we're wrapping up here, this session provides one free CEU hour to claim that. Just complete the post-session survey. I believe Jasmine has just dropped that back again in the chat. Just make sure to select yes to the question on there, whether you're applying for CEU credit. And you should get your credit in just a few weeks by email. I want to thank our speaker, John, for sharing his time with us today, and to thank all of you for participating in this conversation. We look forward to seeing you at future TxSUS sessions, and thank you again for the lively discussion and Q&A.
Thank you all very much.